The atmosphere was electric as Karoline Leavitt appeared on an International Economic Forum panel that was being lived to audiences across North America and Europe, with political heavyweights, economists, and media personalities in attendance. The panel was expected to be a standard discussion on global trade relations, inflation, and cross-border cooperation. What no one expected was a moment that would send diplomatic shockwaves through both Canada and the United States. Leavitt, a rising star in the conservative political world, known for her sharp rhetoric and populist leanings, quickly pivoted from economic policy to a targeted, unfiltered critique of Canada and its citizens that many described as inflammatory, arrogant, and utterly As the cameras kept rolling, it became clear that something seismic was unfolding in real time. Leavitt leaned into her microphone, gesturing emphatically as she declared, "Let's stop pretending that Canada sets any standard worth following. They're passive, they caved to pressure. Frankly, I'm tired of hearing them lecture us about civility or values. They couldn't even stand up to a truck convoy without crumbling." The moderator's eyebrows shot up. A murmur rippled through the audience. The panel, which had included dignitaries from the UK, Germany, and Japan, fell momentarily silent. It wasn't just the content of her words, it was the condescension in her tone, the unmistakable smirk, and the way she brushed aside a neighboring panelist's attempt to interject. The insult wasn't just about politics. It had crossed into the personal, casting aspersions on an entire nation's character. Newsrooms from Vancouver to Toronto exploded within minutes. Clips circulated online with headlines like "Karoline Leavitt slams Canada." Social media erupts in outrage in Ottawa. "American politician mocks Canadian resolve." Politicians on both sides of the aisle in Canada responded swiftly, condemning her remarks as disrespectful, embarrassing, and damaging to diplomatic relations. Even American officials distanced themselves, issuing statements clarifying that Leavitt's words were her own and not reflective of broader U.S. sentiment. But the response that truly captivated the public came not from an angry rebuke or a social media flame war. It came from Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, a man known for his calm demeanor, intellectual rigor, and impeccable diplomatic poise. Carney, who had remained silent during Leavitt's outburst, finally adjusted his microphone and calmly turned toward her. The moment had that rare silence where even breathing felt loud. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't roll his eyes, but his words would travel farther than any shout could. "Miss Leavitt," he began, "Canada's strength has never been in saber-rattling or showmanship. It's in building alliances, upholding the rule of resolves, of law, and earning trust. And if your definition of strength is volume and insults, then I invite you to revisit history because the world respects consistency more than bravado." The audience erupted, not in boos or cheers, but in applause that started slowly and rose like a wave. Cameras flashed. Reporters started typing. A defining moment had just unfolded, and the contrast couldn't have been starker. Leavitt, visibly rattled, attempted to recover. She chuckled nervously and quipped, "Well, I guess I struck a nerve." But the damage had been done, and Carney's measured response had already taken root in the minds of viewers around the globe. He didn't engage further. He didn't need to. The elegance of his words, combined with the weight of his reputation, had already silenced the room in a way few could. In that moment, Carney became more than a central banker or economic advisor. He became the moral compass of the panel. Meanwhile, Leavitt's smirk began to fade as she scrolled through her phone under the table, likely catching wind of the social media backlash erupting in real time. Tweets, hashtags, and live clips of Carney's response were already trending worldwide. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau released a brief statement that afternoon praising Carney's dignified articulation of Canadian values and reiterating the importance of respectful international dialogue. Other Canadian officials joined in lauding Carney's poise and condemning Leavitt's rhetoric. But it wasn't just political leaders who responded, it was the people. Canadians flooded social media with stories of kindness, resilience, and unity, reminding the world that their strength wasn't in shouting, but in standing firm. Without the hashtag, "Sorry, not sorry," Karoline trended for 48 hours straight, filled with Canadians both defending their identity and mocking Leavitt's understanding of their country. For the first time in a long while, Canada's national pride was ignited not by a hockey game or a national holiday, but by a dignified defense in a moment of public insult. In contrast, American audiences were sharply divided. While some far-right circles hailed Leavitt's bravery for saying what needed to be said, most mainstream viewers found her behavior unprofessional and embarrassing. Late-night hosts used the clip for monologues with comedians roasting her lack of diplomatic decorum. Political analysts noted that her remarks might damage future opportunities for US Canada, cooperation and climate policy, trade negotiations, and cross-border infrastructure. Sponsors of the event distanced themselves from her appearance, with one international foundation quietly pulling her from an upcoming panel. The consensus among moderates and centrists was clear. This wasn't a bold stand. It was a reckless miscalculation. And Mark Carney's response had exposed the Canadians behind her bluster. Carney, for his part, declined all interview requests in the days following the panel. He didn't gloat, didn't repost the viral video, and made no further public comment. Instead, his team released a single statement. Mr. Carney believes respectful discourse is the foundation of meaningful progress. He remains committed to dialogue over division. That one sentence echoed louder than 100 talking heads. And once again, it reminded people why Carney had earned the rare distinction of trust on both sides of the Atlantic. In a world increasingly addicted to conflict, his restraint became the headline. And Karoline Leavitt, despite her attempt to dominate the conversation, had unwittingly handed it over to someone who didn't even need to raise his voice to win the room back in Washington. Leavitt tried to spin the moment. She went on several conservative talk shows claiming her words were taken out of context and that she had simply meant to highlight policy disagreements between the two countries. But the recordings didn't lie, and every ray of the panel reminded viewers that her tone had been more derisive than diplomatic. What made it worse was her failure to acknowledge Carney's statement. Instead of responding with maturity or grace, she doubled down, referring to Carney in one radio interview as a bureaucrat trying to sound profound. That one remark backfired immediately. Even hosts who had supported her previous campaigns began to distance themselves. It was clear she had underestimated both Carney's influence and the public's hunger for decency over drama. What followed was an unexpected shift in tone across political media. Analysts began re-examining what qualities they truly valued in leadership. One morning panels and evening debates, hosts and guests referenced Carney's response as a gold standard. For public figures, he didn't just win that exchange. One commentator noted, he redefined how to win without throwing a punch. Universities hosted webinars using the incident as a teaching tool for aspiring diplomats. What we witnessed wasn't a shutdown, said one professor. It was a demonstration of intellectual leadership. Meanwhile, Leavitt's political aspiration, once rising quickly through the ranks, hit turbulence. Donors grew quiet. Scheduled events were postponed. And though her supporters stayed loyal, her momentum faltered under the weight of her own arrogance. As for Canada, something remarkable happened in the aftermath. Carney's moment on that stage reignited national pride for many Canadians. It wasn't just about defending themselves, it was about finally being seen in a media landscape often dominated by American perspectives. Carney had held his ground and reminded the world what Canadian dignity looked like. Schools replayed the video during civics lessons. Editorials praised the subtle power of grace. For a country often labeled it polite, it was a reminder that civility doesn't mean weakness. It means control, confidence, and knowing when silence is stronger than sound. In cafes, at kitchen tables, and office elevators, people didn't just talk about Carney, they admired him. And in an age where heroism is often loud and brash, his version of leadership struck a very different chord. Back in the U.S., a quiet reckoning was taking place in Leavitt's inner circle. Her team issued a carefully worded statement days later, calling the exchange a moment of misinterpretation, but it lacked sincerity. Critics pointed out that her refusal to acknowledge the broader consequences showed a lack of reflection. Meanwhile, Carney's statement was framed and hung inside a university economics department, next to quotes by Keynes and Mandela. In just a few sentences, he had reshaped not only a conversation, but a narrative about what power can look like when it's not trying to overpower. It wasn't about winning, it was about wisdom. And in that regard, Mark Carney didn't just respond to Karoline Leavitt, he rose above her. As the weeks turned into months, the Leavitt-Carney confrontation began appearing in retrospectives and documentaries about modern political discourse. It was no longer just a viral moment that became a case study. In contrast, commentators noted how Carney, with precision and gravitas, had not only defended a nation, but demonstrated how civility can disarm even the harshest provocations in political strategy seminars. His response was dissected line by line, while Leavitt's impulsive jabs were highlighted as examples of what not to do when under pressure. Even international diplomats referenced the moment in private conversations as a reminder that diplomacy is not a contest of who speaks loudest, but who speaks last and best. A year after the incident, Carney was invited to deliver a keynote at the same forum where it all began. The hall was packed and the buzz before he walked on stage was unmistakable. No one mentioned Leavitt by name, but everyone knew as he began his speech. Carney opened with a single line that drew knowing laughter and applause. This time, let's begin with listening. It was subtle, dignified, and perfect. The speech focused on economic resilience and global unity, but his mere presence, some bothered, principled, and thoughtful, carried a weight that few in the room could deny. That night, social media exploded once more, but this time with admiration. People weren't sharing a dramatic take, they were celebrating a legacy of conduct. Meanwhile, Leavitt's political future remained uncertain. She continued making appearances, attempting to rally her base. But her previous aura of rising star had dimmed. Her name had become synonymous with overreach and misplaced bravado. Despite her attempts to pivot or rebrand, the shadow of that moment followed her. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she failed to own it afterward. Even allies quietly admitted that Carney's measured grace had left her without a credible counter. And in today's hyper-recorded world, one bad moment, especially when paired with the right response, can become a career-defining one. In the end, the story wasn't just about Karoline Leavitt or Mark Carney. It was about what kind of leaders the world needs. Now, leaders who can rise above, who can disarm with words rather than escalate with insults. Leaders who understand that real strength isn't about dominating a room, it's about dignifying it. And for all the noise that erupted from that one panel, the clearest message came in the form of stillness, patience, and truth. Mark Carney didn't silence Karoline Leavitt with anger. He silenced her with something far more powerful: respect earned and unwavering. And in doing so, he reminded the world that in an age of outrage, grace still speaks loudest.